The Skoda Kodiaq as we know it is about to come to an end, with the second generation about to arrive at the end of 2024, bringing with it a host of design, technology and powertrain updates, which we're all very excited for. But you know what? Of all the cars that I've driven that were in dire need of an update, this is certainly not one of them. And I think there's a real opportunity here for some buyers to snap up a really good deal on what I think is one of the most well-rounded family cars that money can buy. With me today is the top spec performance-focused Kodiaq RS, which is actually the most popular grade in the range, just ahead of the base model style. And at just over $70,000, this is certainly not a cheap vehicle. However, you have to consider that this is a three-row SUV, at least technically, and for that sort of money, you're looking at something like a middle-of-the-range Toyota Kluger hybrid. So maybe it's not so crazy after all. But can this RS grade seriously pull it off, serving Monday to Friday as a practical, easy-to-live-with family vehicle, while on the weekends being something fun to go for a spin in? Well, this week, my family and I have spent some serious time getting to know this car, and I have spent some serious time tearing up Sydney's best B roads to find this out. Now, before we get started today, please don't forget to like and subscribe and comment down below if you want to see more content like this.
Chasing cars, honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by Budget Direct. Now, a lot of you are probably very familiar with what a Kodiaq looks like, and it hasn't changed a great deal over the years. Even this incoming update still looks pretty similar on the front end. It's more the rear end that we're going to see the difference. But I do think it is overall a pretty timeless appearance, and I do love a few details about it. The first is this iconic Skoda grille that we've got here, which I've always thought looks like a bit of a mustache on their cars for whatever reason. Because this is the top spec RS grade, Skoda has thrown pretty much everything at this that they need to. And that includes a few features like the Matrix LED headlights, which I really like. And if we walk down to the side here, we've also got these 20-inch alloy wheels. I personally not a big fan of them, especially this kind of aero appearance, but you know, it is what it is, and if it genuinely saves you money on fuel, then what's the harm, I suppose? Now, coming down the side here, we get a better look at this color, which is called Steel Gray, and it's the only free color option on the Skoda Kodiaq RS range. You can go for some other really nice and handsome colors. I really like the blue personally, but that's gonna set you back an extra $770. And there is actually one other option you can get for this car, apart from roof racks and other things like that. You can get some side steps. They'll set you back an extra $1,400. Standing down the side here, it's easy to forget that this is a three-row SUV. It's just under 4.7 meters long, and it's quite a bit smaller than your typical three-row SUV. And I think that is really a big advantage when it comes to drivability, and especially living in cities, as we're going to talk about a bit more later on. But for now, let's see what those three rows are like inside. So here in the interior of the Kodiaq, we see what we've seen for many years now. We've got the touchscreen at the top, the physical climate controls down the bottom here, and directly ahead of us, we've got the digital driver's display. And interestingly, it's not really a format that Skoda's looking to change all that much. So in the incoming update, we're going to see this 9.2-inch display replaced by a 13-inch unit, and they're going to retain the physical buttons and knobs down here. How fantastic is that? At least in my opinion. And I'm really glad they've done it, because this is a system that just simply works quite well. We've got buttons down here primarily for climate, which are really easy to use on the move. And because our multimedia is separate, I can just completely leave that alone. The screen itself isn't aging all that bad either. We've got things like wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. A lot of brand new cars don't have that feature, so it's really great to see that integrated. Some other nice features in this space include the 12-speaker Canton stereo here. Bit of an unusual brand that we don't see in a lot of vehicles, but it does sound pretty good in my opinion. We've also got these really cool leather seats here. They're quilted stitching, and they just look really cool. They look like a proper race car, but they're also quite smart. They're electronically adjustable. We've got four-way lumbar adjustment. How good's that? And we've also got some things like manual under thigh adjustment, which I personally really appreciate to try and conform to more people's body styles. Now, we can't talk about a Skoda interior without talking about how thoughtful and quirky they are. And there's a number of areas which I think it really shines here. Even simple stuff, for example, like I take out the cigarette lighter here, not a real one, just a fake one, and we can put it in this special holder here. There's also a special holder for the key, and we've got these two cup holders either side here. A small whinge about the cup holders though is that because they're very narrow and they're very low, you can't really get something like a keep cup or really any sort of large coffee cup in there, so a little bit of a disappointment there. In terms of other areas where I think this interior could be improved, well look, some of the materials around here probably could be of better quality. Some of the plastics are a little bit shiny, don't feel all that great in the hand, and the gloss black material down here, which I think is going to be scratched up in a matter of seconds. The only feature which I think is outright missing in the Kodiaq RS though is a heads-up display. Something I personally really like to see in vehicles in Australia, given how many speed cameras we have around the place, and also the fact that this is a performance car. You're going to go from go to woe pretty quickly, and you'll want to see when you get to woe so you can slow down. So sitting back here behind my own driving position, we do have a good amount of room considering the class of the car. So I've got a good amount of rear room, good amount of tow room, and I'm pretty comfortable in this seat. They have a good amount of shape to them, these outboard rear seats, and the middle seat here, while a little bit firm, is still plenty wide enough to have a fifth person back here in a pinch. As far as outright amenities, we've got these air vents here, which are fantastic to see, good size I think as well, and we have a third zone climate control, so the kiddies or whoever else back here can adjust it to how they like it. We've got heating for the outboard seats here, which is really quite nice, and a 12-volt socket down here. Though unfortunately, we don't really have any USB-C or USB-A ports of any kind. A little bit disappointing, so I suppose you can get an adapter for that 12-volt down there. But really the star of the show, I think, is the fact that we have these pull-up and down sunshades. I've had these up pretty much permanently in their raised position this week because I've been transporting my daughter around, and it has been a really hot day. One thing I haven't been using is this panoramic sunroof, which is all the way in its retracted position right now, and it looks absolutely beautiful. But the sun being how it is, that has stayed closed pretty much all the time. Now, sitting in the back here, you can probably tell this isn't a place designed for adults. I pretty much had to move the second row here, slide it far forward as I could, and even still, my head is welded against the ceiling here and my knees are welded against the seat in front of me. Probably not a place you'd want to put adults for a long period of time. Maybe some adults you don't like back here for a few minutes at a time. Though I do think kids would be a little bit more comfortable. There is a bit of a drop in the floor here, so it's not just a completely flat experience with your knees around your ears. And the thing that really does make this a proper third row vehicle is the fact that we actually have some airbags all the way back here, which is unfortunately not something we see on every third row vehicle. For example, the X-Trail that I was testing the other day does not have airbags in the third row. So it's really great to see that Skoda has that feature on a vehicle which is actually quite getting on in years. So as I said, my family and I have been living with the Kodiaq this week, and as part of that, I've been putting a baby seat in the back here quite often. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about one very handy feature of this vehicle. Now, fun fact, ordinarily I carry around one of these wherever I go, it's just an inflatable seat rest thing. And the reason I do that is because I'm trying to stop the sort of accident you see a lot with kids when they accidentally open doors into walls. Not a great look. But the Skoda here, as you might notice, has a pop-out door protector, and this is on every door of this vehicle. Pretty snazzy indeed. But anyway, onto the baby seats. So we open the door like so. It opens up to a decently wide angle. And I'm gonna put the baby seat in now to see how big it is, and look at that. So look, I'd be lying if I said that I didn't have to move the front seat forward about yay much to be able to get this in, but generally I think for a lot of occupants that go on the front passenger seat of these vehicles, they're probably not going to have to compromise their seating position all that much. So a bit of a tick for the Skoda here, though it probably could be better for a large SUV. So on now to the boot. Power tailgate, as you would expect at a vehicle at this price point, and we open up to reveal this pretty large boot. Now, a few measurements for you. When we've got all three rows in place, it's 270 litres, which I actually think is pretty decent for this class. It certainly passes what I like to call the school bag check, which means that when you've got all the seats in place, as you often would in a school run, you've still got room to put the school bags in here. When you've got just two rows in place, well, it's actually a pretty huge 765 litres. Pretty massive space for what is pretty close in dimensions to a mid-size SUV. Now, a big boot is one thing, but a clever boot is quite another. And we see quite a few amenities in the back here, which do make life easier. For example, we have a lever on either side here to quickly flip the seats down. We've got some shopping bag hooks, a 12-volt socket, and we also have this, which is a bit of a rarity in this segment, unfortunately, and that's actually a place to keep your cargo cover, so it doesn't just get left in the garage indefinitely like so many of them do. And down below that is the Space Saver spare wheel. I can't tell you how commendable I find that they've managed to package in 7 seats back here while also having room for a spare wheel. Bravo, Skoda. So being a sensible family car and all, how much is this actually going to cost you to run? Well, let's start with some fuel figures. So the official combined consumption claim is 7.5 litres per 100 Ks. And interestingly, that's actually 0.7 litres per 100 Ks less than the other models in the range, which are less powerful. So sometimes you really do get to have your cake and eat it too. In terms of the figures we've been seeing, well, it's been closer to about 9.5 litres per 100 Ks. But in saying that, we've been driving this thing pretty hard this week. On to servicing. Well, Skoda will offer you a $2,600 5-year service pack for this one, and you can go for a long one if you wish. And warranty, that has been another boon for Skoda recently. They've extended themselves out to a 7-year unlimited kilometer warranty, which is really fantastic, if not the best in this class. So what's it like to drive the Kodiaq? Well, given that it's got an RS badge on the front, how about we talk about performance first? So like so many things in the Skoda and Volkswagen and even Audi range, this is fitted with an EA888 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine. It's got a 7-speed transmission and an all-wheel drive system. Interestingly, this is the only Skoda RS with an all-wheel drive system, so there is a bit of a point of difference there if you're looking to something like the Octavia. The Octavia does have an all-wheel drive system overseas, but not in Australia, sadly. So that engine produces 180 kilowatts of power at 6,500 RPM, which is decently high in the rev range, pretty much almost at the max of this engine. And as far as torque, it produces 370 Newton meters between 1,600 RPM and 4,300 RPM. And that's a really good range, I think. Probably could be a little bit lower where it begins, but I still think you get a good amount of shove of torque right off the line. And it means that when you come to your everyday driving, the RS is quite adept. It just doesn't really feel like it's trying, and that is something that I think is particularly commendable in a vehicle which, you know, does have the ability to seat 7 people. So when you pull up to a stoplight in one of these, you do have the ability to get off the line pretty darn quickly. Skoda claims a 0 to 100 time of 6.6 seconds. Interestingly, if you look at its sibling in the Tiguan R, which makes 235 kilowatts of power and 400 Newton meters of torque with this same engine, effectively, it cuts it down to 5.1. So there is a little bit of a difference in acceleration times there, at least on paper. When you start to really challenge this engine on a B road, it's pretty competent, though I will say that there were definitely some times that I was in search of more power. I simply just think this chassis can handle a lot more power than it currently has. But what about handling? Well, this is an SUV, so of course there are going to be some compromises, but I did find myself pretty impressed overall with what the Skoda had to offer. It isn't the most chuckable thing. You can't just throw it around a corner and expect it to behave or be especially playful. But what you can do is you can be smooth with your inputs and pitch it into the corner in the right angle. Try and think about your driving line properly, and the amount of G's that you can load up in that corner is surprisingly impressive. And I will say that when I was having a play with the adaptive suspension system on this one, it was quite impressive the fact that even in sport mode, which is its firmest mode, I didn't ever feel uncomfortable in this car. In fact, flatly, in any sort of driving, I haven't really ever once felt uncomfortable in this car. I've had some colleagues who have previously driven this spec, and they said that they have had some crashy experiences from the suspension, so perhaps I haven't hit the right pothole. But in general, I was very impressed. I was coming into some of these corners driving it pretty darn hard, and there would be some mid-corner bumps, but nevertheless, I didn't feel overly uncomfortable, and perhaps more importantly, the Kodiaq wasn't shifted off its intended driving line because suspension wasn't capable of soaking it up while doing some hard driving. And really, I think there's even ground here for Skoda to go even more firm on a suspension setting for this one, because it just seems so competent even in its firmest setting currently. It's interesting to see that with the new generation of the Kodiaq, they're also developing a new generation of this adaptive suspension setup referred to as DCC, or Dynamic Chassis Control. And this is essentially designed to bring a little bit more control and even a little bit more comfort. So it's great to see some development there, but these are still words on a page, and we're going to wait to see what the actual results are when the new vehicle comes out. But for now, I do think this is a pretty competent setup, and honestly, I wasn't expecting such a smooth rider from something with a performance badge on it. Probably one area that I did notice that there could be just a fraction more improvement in the Kodiaq RS when I was doing some hard driving was in the 7-speed dual clutch. It's a unit that we love and we see it in a number of cars, but when I was properly pushing the limits on this one, I did notice that there were times, for example, where it simply wasn't changing down fast enough in its most aggressive mode. And when I took over in manual, there were times where it still denied me that downshift where it did have the bandwidth to do so. So it would be a bit nicer to see a little bit more cooperation from the transmission there. And while I'm at it, perhaps just a tiny bit bigger on the paddle, Skoda, because these are really small. But let's get away from all that sporty driving nonsense for just a minute and talk about the sort of driving you're going to be doing a lot more of, and that is your everyday driving on the highway and suburban areas. Starting with suburban areas, I think that the Kodiaq is really rewarded by its smaller exterior dimensions versus other 7-seaters out there. Though they may have a little bit more room in their third row, they are a lot more hard to drive in some of those tight back streets. I'm thinking the Kluger, I'm thinking the Pathfinder. These are pretty big. And personally, when I was taking my daughter to daycare this week and going through some tight back streets, I wasn't really struggling at all. And I think that's a real credit to this vehicle. It's not too large, it's not too cumbersome, and I think more drivers will feel comfortable driving this vehicle. It's also notable in these conditions that where you're facing some of the worst types of road, which has been neglected for years, that I wasn't finding it all that much uncomfortable either. In fact, my daughter even nodded off while I was driving a few times. So that's certainly very nice. It was a similar story when turning my attention to highway driving, which does dominate much of my commute. The Skoda here is pretty darn quiet when it wants to be, and it was great to see that the engine wasn't too loud, and it certainly didn't have any struggles getting up to highway speeds as you would expect from a performance model such as this. And really, I think I'd be pretty happy doing a lot of miles behind the wheel in this thing, and that's partly due to that suspension, partly due to that sound deadening, and also due to these seats, which I think are really quite comfortable. But what about safety? Well, as of 2024, this no longer carries a 5-star ANCAP rating, and that's because that rating has since expired under ANCAP's new policy. Though I suppose it is quite encouraging to know that it once did. It covers all your main bases by having things like front and rear parking sensors, 360 camera, though it is looking a little bit old now, I must say, but also some features we've only just seen trickle in the last few years, like multi-collision brake. So if you do have one accident, for example, you don't roll into the path of another. So a handy little feature to have. In saying that, there are some areas where the Kodiaq is starting to fall behind its competition in the fact that it lacks a front center airbag. So it'd be great to see that introduced in the incoming model. I've always been fond of the idea that there's a responsible way to make an irresponsible decision, and this Kodiaq RS is a fantastic example of that. With its 7 seats and decent price point, this is a vehicle which really lives in a land of its own. And Skoda has been making great strides to make itself more appealing as a brand with its 7-year unlimited kilometer warranty. If you're looking for a sports car that feels like you're on the ragged edge constantly, then this may not be for you. But if you are looking for something that injects a bit of excitement into what is a tremendously competent family vehicle, then this is a pretty good buy. Now, $70,000 is a lot of money, but as I said, there isn't really much else in this class. Its closest competitor that I can think of is a Mercedes-Benz GLB 35, and that's over $100,000. So when you look at it that way, this thing starts to seem like a bit of a bargain. In saying that, it's not perfect, and I really do think this could use some extra power. So it's not all that surprising to see that there are rumors saying that the next generation Kodiaq RS is going to come with a 200 kilowatt motor, and I certainly hope that comes to fruition. If you don't need the third row, I would encourage buyers to check out the Tiguan R though, because for an extra $3,000 odd, you're getting yourself into something which has an extra 55 kilowatts, and there's that tricky rear differential on that 4Motion all-wheel drive system, which really is quite surprisingly good. It's honestly such a credit to Skoda that even after more than 6 years on sale, this Kodiaq is as good as it is. Sure, it's fallen behind in some areas like technology, a little bit in safety, and perhaps even design, but you know, I've seen a hell of a lot worse than this. So while I am really looking forward to seeing what the next generation Kodiaq is like, currently this is still a tremendously competent vehicle in its first generation. And if you are in the market for something like this, I would recommend you go check it out. But those have just been my thoughts for today. Please let me know in the comments down below if you own one of these. I'm keen to hear your thoughts. Spoken to a few Kodiaq RS owners about this, and they absolutely seem to love their cars. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, but for now, that's all. Thanks for watching Chasing Cars.